You know, the most upside down moment in history was on a Friday when the Creator was crucified by his creation. Omnipotent, he cried, the writer writes. The owner of all things, he had no home. The King of kings, he had become a servant. The Creator, he was spit upon by his creation. The giver of life, he was crucified naked on a cross. Now, what do you do with that? Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 1, verse 18, For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved, it is the power of God. Now, if you were just living in the first century, it would be hard to argue with that first statement. The message of the cross is foolishness, because it would have seemed absolutely foolish to those people. Even from our perspective, as we look back on the cross, the whole crucifixion account is really more than ironic. Think about this. When you have the soldiers mocking Jesus as a king, with a crown of thorns on his head, with a purple robe on his bloodied and beaten back, with a stick put in his hand to be a scepter, as they're mocking him as king, think about it, he was a king. He was the king. It's more than ironic, and it doesn't make any sense. They blindfold him. They take turns punching him. They say, prophesy if you're a prophet. Tell us who hit you. Well, he was a prophet, even though he didn't say anything. He knew who hit him. He knew the guy's name. He knew the number of hairs on the top of his head. It's more than ironic. You keep reading through this story, and especially if you're a first century Jew, the cross is foolishness, because it was absolutely the ultimate symbol of weakness. Let me give you a few reasons why it would have been the ultimate symbol of weakness for them as they looked at it. It would have been the ultimate symbol of weakness because the cross represented their unwilling submission to the Roman government. So whenever the Jews would rise up against the Roman authority, the Romans would strike down that rebellion by crucifying the rebels, sometimes as many as 2,000 at once along the dusty roads of Palestine. It was really the Romans' not so subtle way of saying to the Jews, with the cross, really saying to the Jews, we're the ones in a position of strength here. Don't forget that. You're in a position of weakness. We're the ones in a position of power. And so the Jews would have despised the cross because of its weakness. They would have despised it as a symbol of weakness because it also represented their humiliation. Because that's really what the cross was all about. The Romans had a lot of different ways to execute a person. They would stone a person. They would do that. They could use fire. They could just use the sword. They would even poison sometimes with hemlock. All of these were methods of execution for the Romans. So why would they bring out the cross? I mean, actually, it was more expensive. It took a lot more time. But they used it at the times when they wanted to publicly humiliate the person who was being crucified. That's what it was all about. Maximize the pain, publicly humiliate the person, so then people would know. It was a symbol of weakness because it represented absolute humiliation. Cross also represented suffering. I mean, Jesus is crucified like most were crucified. His arms, before he was crucified, were tied to the top of a post, stretched out the skin on his back, and he received the scourging from the Romans. They were experts at beating somebody to the point right before they would die. Now, I say experts because 6 out of 10 men died from the scourging alone. You can imagine the horrible suffering, and the cross represented suffering. It also represented defeat. I mean, after a person would be scourged, the soldiers would take the horizontal beam, and they would put that on the shoulders then of the one being crucified. And we know that Jesus had that beam across his soldiers and forced to carry it down the road that's become known now as the Via Dolorosa. This road was not the shortest path to Golgotha outside the city gates, but it was the busiest. The idea was to attract as many people as possible, like it was a sporting event. It was the Romans' way of saying, hey, we win, you lose. Symbol of defeat. But mostly it was represented weakness because it was a symbol of death. And so you can't really blame people in the first century that Paul is speaking of who would just look at the cross and say, this is foolishness. So the question then is, why the cross? Well, here's some things that I want you to consider. The cross was chosen because it is the ultimate symbol of weakness. God takes what is from the world's perspective, something that is weak and despised. He takes that which represents humiliation and defeat. He finds the one symbol that is least likely the thing to represent love and life, and God says, you know what, that's the symbol I'm going to use. That'll be perfect. Because the ultimate symbol of weakness became his ultimate demonstration of strength. It's precisely because the cross represents such weakness that God chose it, so that his strength can be seen. But you know why else God can use the cross? It's because he can. Because he can. Who else but God could take something like the cross and turn it into the symbol of life? The symbol of death turned into the symbol of life and a symbol of freedom. Who else but God can do that? Who else but God can take the cross that represents defeat and turn it into a symbol of victory? Who else but God, think about this, can take a cross that represents guilt, turn it into a symbol of grace? Who else but God can take the cross that represents condemnation and turn it into a symbol of freedom? Who else but God can take a cross that represents hurting and suffering and turn it into something that represents hope and healing? Who else but God can take a cross that represents death and turn it into the symbol of life? No one else can do that but God. He takes that which is the ultimate symbol of weakness and turns it into his ultimate demonstration of strength. Because he can. And that's what he did for us, our Lord Jesus, on that Good Friday. Because he can, and he lived, and he died, and he rose again for you and I. Now here's why this matters, and why it matters for all of us, and why it makes a difference for all of us. Here's why. Because what God did for the cross, he can do for you and he can do for me. And so that's really the best prayer we can pray today. And I just want to encourage you on this Holy Week. Take a moment and pray this prayer. Lord, what you did for the cross, would you do it for me? Father, would you do for me what you did on the cross, because I am defeated and I could use victory. Lord, I am guilty and I need your grace. I am condemned and I need your freedom. I am hurting and I need your healing. Lord, I am dead and I need your life. Lord, would you do for me what you did on the cross? We thank you for your incredible love. And if you can do it on the cross, he can do it for you. If you can do it on the cross, he can do it for me. Because his strength is made perfect in our weaknesses. God bless you.